Hey everyone, welcome back to Breaching the Boardroom. Today we are diving into the 2025 IT industry outlook, and I couldn't think of two better people to break it all down for us. And first up, we've got Carolyn April, Senior Director of Industry Analysis at CompTIA. Carolyn has spent years researching and analyzing trends in the IT space, helping businesses make sense of where the industry is headed. And joining her is Seth Robinson, who also plays a key role at CompTIA, shaping their research and insights on emerging technology trends. Between the two of them, we're getting an inside look at what's coming next for IT, what's changing, and what business leaders need to be thinking about in 2025. Carolyn and Seth, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seth, should we clarify where we work now these days? I think
we could start off with a little bit
Please.
of news.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, CompTIA closed a sale. So CompTIA, the trade association, closed a sale of CompTIA, the brand and the certification assets to private equity. And so Carolyn now is the vice president of industry research at Global Technology Industry Association. Which is the remaining association part focused on the IT industry. And she's heading up research over there, and I'm remaining with CompTIA, still doing actually a lot of the same things that you talked about there. And we worked on the IT industry outlook report when we were both at CompTIA, and we're going to continue collaborating moving forward with our own podcast Volley and probably a little bit of other research sharing. But yeah, that's where we're both sitting now.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
so I wanted to clarify that up front. I'd say the IT Outlook was probably the last big research report we did as a joint venture under the CompTIA umbrella, and then right shortly after that is when the sale happened. But we are here to talk about the Outlook, and we've got plenty to discuss today. So happy to join you, Ashley. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, before we hopped in, for those unfamiliar, could you give us a quick overview of CompTIA and GTIA and the work you do there? I think we just covered that, unless you have any other comments to make on that.
I don't think so. I think for those of you who are familiar with CompTIA from a membership perspective, and I know that you are an MSSP, so a lot of our members happen to be in the channel. In fact, the majority of our members are in the channel. So I'm anticipating that a lot of the audience on the podcast today is going to be coming from the channel. So you're probably familiar with CompTIA as the nonprofit association on which you can become a member and you go to some of our events, et cetera. That is what GTIA is. We are the association. We are the nonprofit. We continue to have those of you who were members of CompTIA have been carried over into the GTIA fold. So if you are out there in the MSP landscape right now and wondering, if you are still part of that association, you are. So that is effectively where I work. And I'm just continuing the research role essentially that I was doing at CompTIA. There'll be some changes, obviously, but we'll continue in the vein of providing research as a membership benefit that you get as part of association duties.
Yeah, and for those of you that are familiar with a lot of the workforce research that CompTIA has done, the Tech Jobs Report or the State of the Tech Workforce, those are a lot of the things that we are going to continue on the research side of CompTIA as we continue to support our certification and training business. So a lot of the things that have happened within previous CompTIA research are continuing to happen either with GTIA research or new CompTIA research.
So let's hop in. What stood out the most this year in this year's report? Were there any surprises compared to previous years?
I would say the IT Outlook, let's explain it a little bit to you, is a report that we've been doing for many years. And it's sort of our end of the year, beginning of the year, look forward to whatever year it happens to be turning the calendar page on. And we come up with 10 different trends that we think are going on in the industry. We also conduct surveys of our channel audience and of an IT professional audience to get a kind of mixed flavor of what's going on in both of those populations. And so the trends, vary from highly technical type trends to business trends to workforce trends. Obviously, we try to cover the gamut of what's going on in our industry and for professionals who work in technology jobs outside of the industry. As far as carryover goes, I would say, technology, there's a healthy appetite for it out there, and that those who work in the tech space, either as business owners in the channel or who work as technology professionals, I would say the carryover is there's a lot of optimism. There's, a healthy outlook on what's going to be happening in the year ahead. And although that is tempered with a little bit of caution, as it always is. So I would say that would probably be the biggest carryover. We could get into detail on some of the trends as we move forward here in the podcast, but people are excited about technology still. There's a healthy, like I said, a healthy appetite for it. There's spending for it. There's a lot of new things on the horizon, and both of those populations are kind of excited about those two things.
Right. Yeah. I would say the degree of optimism may be a surprise to some people, given, some of the trends around generative AI, or even a lot of the churn that's still happening with remote work or back to the office or whatever that is. I think that there are a lot of analysts or pundits that expect that might dampen some of the optimism around IT professionals or IT channel professionals. But I think, like Carolyn said, we've seen that optimism stay very resilient year over year. And I think that ongoing appetite for technology, that ongoing demand for expertise and skills is the main thing that keeps that optimism high. And so I think that IT professionals and IT industry professionals have kind of built up this muscle to be optimistic until the sky comes crashing down, actually. That there's a lot of things that are driving demand for technology and appetite, and they just really see sunny skies ahead with some degree of caution, like Carolyn said, usually around external forces, maybe changes in demand, things like that. We might dive into a little bit of that, but yeah, overwhelmingly, it's a story of good feelings.
It's awesome to hear. Let's set the stage for what's happening in the IT industry and what companies should be paying attention to. What are some of the biggest challenges that IT leaders are dealing with right now based on your research?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we identified is this notion that decision makers are starting to take a more critical look at their technology. So we've kind of come off of several years of heavy investment in technology coming out of the pandemic, companies wanting to catch up from wherever they might have paused a little bit, or maybe kind of pick back up the momentum that they had pre-pandemic. So there's been a lot of spending, a lot of hiring. Last year, we definitely saw hiring start to get a little bit more bumpy. We definitely see spending continue to increase, and using some projections from Gartner, we see that spending is projected to increase pretty healthily in 2025, but a lot of that spending might be around major data center build out by megascalers. It could be spread across a business and business units. And so if you're a CIO or a technology leader, you might not have all of that spend at your disposal, but you still might be getting all of the scrutiny and all of the questions about what are we doing with the spend? How are we getting a return on our investment in technology? And I think those types of questions are going to start coming up more and more for both internal IT departments and for external partners.
Yeah, I think that speaking for the channel and the MSP audience, to Seth's point, there's going to be, I think, a lot more proof points that are going to have to happen between the provider, the MSP, and their customers. Customers are pretty savvy these days about technology, and we're noticing that more business people are getting involved with, hey, I wrote a giant check last year for XY's infrastructure, refresh, or we've decided to do some sort of cloud initiative, or we're really, diving into how we can secure our network better. And all of those things are valid, and all of those things are things that companies need to spend on. But the business side of the house is starting to question where where the ROI is and the benefit is. We're seeing a little bit more of that. And I think as business professionals in the channel who go in to work with their customers, especially salespeople and the technical people as well, they need to be able to tell that story in addition to regaling, the best new technology and how it's going to help your company. And this is wonderful and you should buy it. They need to be able to justify that purchase a little bit better. And I think, where Seth said there is that level of caution that's creeping in. It is the sort of anticipation by a lot of business owners that before I spend again and write that big check this year, show me what last year's big check did. And I think, I don't know if you want to call that a challenge or just, that's good business and a business reality that a lot of companies, I think for a while, were not facing. There was a lot of spend, not thinking so much about what you were getting out of it. And I think we've wised up a little bit to that.
Which new technologies are starting to gain real traction?
You want to take that one, Seth?
Well, I mean, it's been all about AI for the past 2 years, and I think it continues to be so. Just this week we saw the news of DeepSeek, coming out of the Chinese hedge
Uh-huh.
fund, really disrupting not only, sort of the technology market, but the stock market as people began to wonder, is this going to completely change which firms have a grasp on building models for low cost. So I think that space continues to be highly chaotic. There's a lot of churn going on, but there's also a lot of question about where is the business use. So all of this focus is on developing the models and driving the costs down and building better models and meeting benchmarks. But I think we still see a lot of businesses struggling to find, what exactly is the use case. An individual business, especially an SMB, typically is going to be building out their own LLM and doing all of these millions or billions of dollars worth of training on a machine like that. And so what exactly does that look like to turn into a product for a business, and how does it get integrated into workflow? I think those are the things that we've been looking at for a couple of years now as we've been studying AI. And I think that continues to be the major technology question. And it has a lot of ripple effects into how you do data management, what you do with your cybersecurity posture. All of these questions that companies have been wrestling with for a little while are now kind of falling under this umbrella of AI. So I think that's kind of the big thing, the big elephant in the room right now.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, AI is obviously on the radar of most channel firms, and we've been tracking it for a few years now. And we definitely see most channel companies emerging from a period of simple experimentation with AI internally in their own business. It's just sort of figure out how to work with it, what they might do to improve their own business and efficiencies, use it for marketing, use it for HR, whatever they're doing. If you're an MSP, using it in some way to do some automation. And we are seeing a little bit more of an uptick now in the data that I'm looking at in MSPs figuring out and other channel companies how to monetize it and actually sell some sort of AI solution, as it were. But as Seth and I often discuss, AI really isn't a product per se that they're going to be selling. It's more of an enabling technology, an underpinning, a feature, a function, whatever you want to call it, to other things, to bigger parts of the technology build that you're going to be putting out there. And that's where I think a lot of channel companies are struggling is, how do we make money? What do we sell? And what we're finding when we talk about use cases, like Seth just talked about, is one of the sweet spots for the channel is consulting around AI. So they might not be selling you something, but helping companies, their customers, figure out what the use cases should be, working with them to strategize about their AI, their own AI posture and what they should do with it is a good way for a lot of channel firms to kind of break into the market. So become that sort of that expert, that provider that goes in and does the consulting work with your customer. You might not be selling them anything from a product perspective, selling them your services and helping them figure out what some of those best use cases are, or where AI may not fit into their organization, because not every company out there is going to have a huge AI rollout. And so I think that's going to be, the initial sweet spot for a lot of channel firms.
What are the top cybersecurity concerns highlighted in the report, and how should organizations address them?
Well, I'd say cybersecurity is kind of something that is not a singular category. It is a blanket over everything that we do from a technology perspective, and something that both the business people within an organization and the technology people have to sit and talk about together. Seth does a great report on the state of cybersecurity every year, and it really digs into some of the technology implications and the trends that are going on in that space. But the number of data breaches, the number of vulnerabilities that companies are finding, and the amount of money and the potential for data loss is so extreme that you cannot be an IT professional and you can't be a channel professional without, no matter what your actual, skill set might be, what you focus on in your day-to-day job, you cannot ignore that cybersecurity is something that has to be considered at every step along the way. And Seth could probably elaborate a little bit more on some of the technical levels of detail on that. But I would say the biggest message about cybersecurity is it has only grown in importance, and there is absolutely no indication that is going to become something that is a commoditized, less important element to your technology stack.
Right. And we continue to see a variety of different cybersecurity attacks or incidents that might fall under a cybersecurity umbrella, like the CrowdStrike incident that happened last year. Not necessarily a data breach or some kind of a nation state attack, but something that definitely impacted availability and required a mitigation plan that wasn't purely technology based, right? It required some hands-on rebooting of systems and all of that type of thing. And it required people to look at their patch process and what exactly they were doing with updates coming in from software vendors. So I think these things continue to happen, but like Carolyn was mentioning, all of it really bubbles up to the business of cybersecurity. Like, how are you doing this? And Carolyn, I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about how that business of cybersecurity and thinking about things like liability and risk and things like that are starting to factor into how MSPs and MSSPs are kind of doing their business and establishing their credentials and then also defining their relationships with their clients.
Yeah, that's become both a challenge, an enormous one, and a huge opportunity for MSPs and MSSPs. I mean, the reality is, as an MSP with domain over all of your customers' networks, you're kind of an easy target for a lot of the cybersecurity criminals out there. Find your way into the MSP's network, and you've got access to other customers. That's very oversimplification, but essentially that is true, and that's one of the things we saw in a couple of years ago with the Las Vegas casino cybersecurity attack. I mean, that was one of the two casinos. I can't remember which one. The vector was through an MSP, which is how they got into their customer, and that ransomware attack was done. And we've collected some data about how MSPs are dealing with that. And one of the things they readily admit is that perhaps all of their lecturing of their customers about how to be better with their own cybersecurity, their own posture is not quite up to speed. And so MSPs really have to take some time to look internally and figure out how to make sure that all of the elements of their own cybersecurity are up to speed, doing well, before they can roll those out to their customers. And that's going to be incredibly challenging and important for them going forward. One of the elements of that is making sure that you have things like cyber insurance, both for your company and that you offer to customers, and you sort of insist that they get it. And that's one of the things that's going to be important. Any customer that is trying to go out there and decide to work with an MSP has to go through some sort of vetting process like you would with any other service provider, because you're trusting them to take over your network, your data, and access to all of that is not something that you want to give away without thinking it through really, really hard. And so MSPs today are going to have to be able to prove themselves and prove that their cybersecurity acumen is there. And again, those who can, that's the opportunity part of it. Those who can differentiate, and they're going to be sort of the winners in this market. Those who cannot will not be the winners in the market. So, it's going to be important for the entire MSP community to focus on messaging around cybersecurity and making sure that they are able to not only back up what they say, but communicate that well to customers.
Yeah. That reminds me. So I have a non-technical role here at NetGain, and I don't have direct access to sensitive client information. But I still had to go through the same trainings so that I could spot phishing email or whatever it might be, because it was told to me when I began, people target MSPs because of all of the sensitive client data. And I think that's why NetGain is SOC 2 certified, SOC 2 Type 2 certified to deal with sensitive information.
Yeah.
So a crucial topic with a lot of shifting happening in tech talent and hiring. Can you provide some insights on how the IT workforce is evolving? Are there any skills that are becoming must-haves for IT professionals?
I can start with this one. We, like I said at the beginning, we've been looking at workforce pretty regularly for a long time now, and we continue to see a lot of strong demand, not only in some emerging areas like data science, but also in some very well-established areas like IT support. So I think the main thing that we see is not that some roles are dropping away and then new roles are popping up, but mostly what you have is a set of roles that's definitely growing and evolving over time, and maybe you get some additional roles as time goes on. But for the most part, the roles that we have are the ones that are evolving. So the IT support role is not what it used to be 10 years ago, not across the board. And from company to company, you might see some different strategies where their IT support does a lot of routine tasks or password management or whatever. And then you might have another company that's automated some of those things, but they still have IT support providing a first line of defense for technical questions. And those technical questions have simply moved up the ladder a little bit. You've got cybersecurity that is part of any technical professional's responsibility these days. And certainly we've got dedicated cybersecurity job roles, but cybersecurity has to be part of your job if you're a network administrator or if you're a data analyst. So I think what we really see is a lot of evolution in that, and things like cybersecurity and basics of data management, and now basics of artificial intelligence and how that works both on the input and the output side. All of those things kind of play a role, and you need to build a strong, broad foundation, and then you begin specializing down any one path or another. So we continue to see really strong demand, even though there's some churn, like I said, through last year. We see really strong demand for software developers, for IT project managers, for IT support, and data scientists and data analysts. So we see demand for skills across the board, not just in one area or another. Companies are really going to have to start thinking about this skills-based approach that's been talked about for the past few years, and how they want to define the skills they're looking for, how each job role has its own skills, and how candidates can prove and validate that they have those skills if they're looking for a job there.
Yeah, I am looking at some data now. I'll give you a little sneak peek, if I will, for an upcoming research study, State of the Channel, that we do every year. And the number two, we asked one question about, what it most worries you, or concerns you about, or would be an inhibitor, that's a better word for it, to channel health in the coming year. And the number one answer is always external factors. So some, enormous economic disaster that happens, a pandemic, something like that. But the second issue that was raised this year, which was not number two last year at all, was workforce skills and skills gaps. So the channel is worried about being able to find, hire, or train the right people for the skills that they're looking for today. So they're clearly looking at ways to meet some of the newer skills like AI, more advanced cybersecurity, taking on some of those data responsibilities that the channel was not really known for in the past, and figuring out ways to find those people out there in the wilderness of hiring, or to, as Seth said, upskill or reskill people that they already have on staff. So that's clearly way top of mind right now for the channel community out there. So it is something that is elevated from previous year's studies. And I think what's driving it a lot is both some of these emerging areas, but also sort of the depth of skills that are now required in some of those jobs that more traditionally might not have had such a heavy load or a more sophisticated load in terms of the skills that are required. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how some of the channel companies find their way. Are they going to adopt this skills-based approach or framework that Seth mentioned, and how they evaluate potential new employees, or they decide to retrain or upskill current employees? It sort of remains to be seen, but I wanted to note that that is definitely something on the rise in terms of a worry point for the channel this year.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of that, I know cybersecurity isn't just a tech problem anymore, it's an everyone problem. So we're not just talking about the tech workforce, we're talking about everyone at your company has a learning curve, and kind of needs to learn, train, and grow to spot cyber attacks and know how to report them to their IT support or managed services provider. I wanted to hop back to Carolyn, your comments about MSPs, managed services providers, being a target for cyber attacks. What kind of questions should business leaders be asking their MSP or MF to make sure that they have protocols in place to protect their data?
Interesting. Yeah, we're one of the trends in the outlook was about having more regulation or formal oversight of MSPs, similar to what you do with some other trade industry type of jobs, like electricians or plumbers who have to be licensed, or more professional services jobs. So if you're a lawyer, you've got to take the bar exam and you're a member of the bar, et cetera. And there's just more oversight over those jobs. Today, there is really nothing for MSPs. And yet they're out there selling themselves as a company that can take over your data and take over your network. And sort of, there's no standards body for that right now. And cybersecurity is definitely driving customers and MSPs themselves, our data shows, to start to think about the need for more standardization, more formalization around things that MSPs have to be able to say they can provide and prove it. You mentioned SOCs. I mean, that's one thing that, a customer might be asking is, do you have your own SOC? Cyber insurance. Do you offer it? Do you have it for your own organization? That chain of liability and accountability, have that formalized somehow in case something does go wrong. Who is accountable and responsible for it? Are your technicians certified? What percentage of them are certified in cybersecurity areas? They want to, you as a business owner who's thinking about signing a contract with an MSP, you want to know the level of technician that they have in their organization. Are these people that are professionally certified? That's going to be an important thing. So you could go down a checklist. As it stands now, that's ad hoc. That's on the business owner. It's on the MSP to communicate if they have those things in place, and that's a way to market themselves and differentiate themselves. But one of the things that's definitely going to be on, I think, the industry's mind in the year ahead is, should we and can we figure out a way to have formal standardization that MSPs who want to get that sort of I am an MSP stamp of approval want to be able to put on their website and say that they are a member of the MSP team? Do we need to have that kind of standards body in place, and how to do that? Right now we don't. So if you're a business out there thinking of contracting with an MSP, get your checklist together about some of those cybersecurity things in particular, and ask. You might want to go and ask other customers who have worked with that MSP to get testimonials to make sure that you're not being told something that isn't true. But right now it's a little Wild Westy, I would say.
Yeah, and until that point comes where we've got something that's a little bit more standardized or regulated, I'll go back to another one of Carolyn's comments about MSPs taking kind of an education role with their customers. And I would say that applies even here in terms of telling customers what questions they should be asking. I think we've seen over the past decade or so that with cloud computing, now with cybersecurity, moving into data management, a lot of clients, a lot of small, businesses, they're not really sure of what should be asked when they're talking to a cloud provider, or when they're talking to an MSP. They've probably just been used to saying, can you set up my network for me so that these things run? And they viewed it almost as a utility. And now that we're dealing with sensitive data and data that's critical to the operation of a business, they need to get a lot more savvy about how they're dealing with their technology and how they're evaluating the people that are dealing with their technology. And I think some of that would come from an MSP, who would sit down with them and say, these are the questions that you should ask. These are the way that we answer these questions. If you're evaluating other people as part of this bid or whatever, these are just some suggestions for you. And I'm sure that a lot of end user companies will be forming a lot of their own peer groups and talking through how do we evaluate technology firms. But I think taking that educational approach as an MSP could go a long way towards building customers' trust and getting some of these standard practices out there, even before we get to having some kind of top-down standard that's applied to everyone.
Yeah, I like that.
Go ahead, Ashley.
It's just saying arming your clients and arming your prospects with all of the information so that they can make an informed decision themselves. Looking ahead, where do you see the IT industry going in the next few years? Do you have any bold predictions?
That's a big one. Well, it's hard to say. I'd say, the AI revolution, but I don't know what's going on with AI now. After the DeepSeek stuff, this has come out. It's going to be, that's going to be interesting to watch how that all plays out. I think, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, the appetite for technology isn't going away. I think the scrutiny around how it's used is going to continue to get a little bit tougher. So customers are going to want some ROI on what they're purchasing and making sure that, the purchases they're making are not just because it's the next greatest thing, but it's really necessary and it's really going to help their business goals. I think the blending of a technologist and a business role is going to be something that's going to continue in the years ahead. It's going to be really important for both sides of the house to have some familiarity with the language of the other side. So if you are a salesperson or a marketing person or a business owner within a channel company or even an end company, you need to have some understanding of technology, and vice versa. The technicians and technology people within your organization have to be able to understand the business side of the house. And I think we've talked about that for years, but I think we've reached a point now where it can't be ignored. I think it's really important. Every decision needs to be made in a collaborative way within an organization, and it isn't in a silo. Beyond that, I'm not going to make any big, bold predictions about, technology itself and what's going to be like the next great thing. If Seth wants to, he can, but I'll stay away from that. I think we continue marching on. I think, like I said, people are still going to buy technology. They love technology. I think it comes down to becoming very good at both selling it, figuring out how to consume it in the correct way, and we move from there.
I will double down on what Carolyn said about the technologists having to blend in some business acumen with their skill set. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is how complex technology stacks are getting. So with AI coming in, with advanced data analytics, with a lot of things happening with the introduction of a lot of SaaS applications over the past several years, a lot of companies have built up this very complex IT architecture. And I think that is part of why they have this concern now about, we've made all this investment, where is the return? How does all of this work? And I think a technologist, whether that's, again, an internal IT employee or, someone that's working with a partner, with a client, they have to be able to explain that complexity, and that they're going to need like layers of knowledge, right? And if they're talking to a board of directors, they don't need to be talking about speeds and feeds. If they're talking about a CIO, they can get down into the details. But through all of this, they're going to have to be making that connection between the technology and the business. And it's not just going to be sufficient anymore to say this piece of technology is stood up, or this piece of technology is operating as promised, or you haven't had any cybersecurity breaches in the past, 8 months. You're going to have to explain in detail what this means to the business and why investment is going to be continued, because that investment is going to continue because of complexity. But that complexity is not always obvious, I think, to a lot of the decision makers. And it's not always obvious how there's a connection between a very complex architecture that needs a lot of maintenance for all the pieces to be working well, and especially to be automated well, if that's the goal, and how that actually drives the business. So I think that will be the key piece going forward. A lot of it, will get down into the software side of the business. Once all the pieces are set up, there's going to be a lot of software needed to connect and automate. And that has been something new for a lot of firms over the past 10 to 15 years. And a lot of firms will continue building their software development capabilities. So I think all of those things will be top of mind for technology leaders.
What advice would you give to SMBs looking to navigate these trends spelled out in your outlook?
Yeah, SMBs, they're both the biggest audience, a customer set for most of the channel, and the channel itself happen to be mostly SMBs. So we're talking about a lot of small companies. And I think they run the gamut. I think we often write off all SMBs as sort of not necessarily being tech savvy. Some are. Some are not. I'd say the biggest issue with many SMBs is wallet, is their resources, both to spend and to hire and all of the things that you need resources for. I think from a channel perspective, the most important thing is understanding the particular needs of those SMB customers. Many of them are in little verticals. They might be an SMB, that's running a hair salon, or is running a small law firm, or running. So from a channel viewpoint, I think looking ahead, we talk a lot about vertical industry specialization, but in many ways, it's more important than ever to think about ways to differentiate your business. And one way to do that would be to look at some of the SMBs and the industry niches that they are in, and kind of familiarize yourself with the applications that they use there, the various other kinds of unique things that to their particular industry. But SMB's biggest issues are resources, fully understanding the technology and what it means to their business. And SMBs today need to skill up as well. And we talk about that in the outlook, is, figuring out ways to elevate their game beyond being, a generalist who only understands how to use their devices and the most basic of software, but also to understand the ramifications of cybersecurity, to understand how to introduce an AI strategy to their organization, to understand how to protect their data and how important data is and how to use their data for business gain and business goals. And that's a lot where the channel can step in and kind of guide them in that journey. But at the end of the day, most SMBs don't have their own IT department. They're often looking to the channel for help. And so they're a unique animal, but they make up most of our economy. So that's where a lot of the money's being spent, even if it's in smaller amounts than what an individual large enterprise might spend on technology every year.
I would say for SMBs themselves, thinking about what they want to do in the future, the biggest question is, what do they want that mix of technology talent to look like? Like Carolyn said, a lot of them right now might not have their own IT department or IT specialist. And I think they need to think about making that investment. And they need to think about, why would we have somebody internal that knows the DNA of the company that can drive some of our technology strategy? And then when we start looking externally, how do we go beyond just a single source that's providing most of our technology needs to think about things on a more granular level? And maybe that single source is still the first point of contact into a broader ecosystem of people that they would partner with. Or maybe the SMB themselves, looks out and starts partnering with multiple different firms for different types of things. I think there has been a fairly simplistic view from a lot of SMBs in the past. And depending on how aggressive they want to be with their technology adoption, I think thinking about this mix of skills, both internal and external, is going to be really critical for those that want to grow more aggressively.
Well, before we wrap up, Carolyn and Seth, this has been such a great conversation. You've given us a ton of insight into where the IT industry is headed, everything from emerging tech to workforce shifts and cybersecurity challenges. So I really appreciate you both taking the time to share your expertise. For anyone who wants to check out the full IT industry outlook report, where is the best place they can find it? And what's the best way for listeners to connect with you?
Okay, that's a good question. I think you can find it through both of us. So you can go to either the CompTIA.org website, and you can find it there. Soon to be able to find it on the GTIA.org website. We're still working on that. So I would say, if you need it today, go to CompTIA, and you'll find it there. And I forget what the second half of your question was.
The best way to get in touch with us is, I'd say, through the website. We will continue to post our new research there. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we've got our own podcast, Volley, so you can check that out. It comes out every other week. And we're talking about our research. We're talking about things we see in the news. So we're always trying to keep an eye on trends and talk about the latest and greatest.
I'll be sure to link that podcast in the description here for listeners to tune into that as well. So for everyone listening, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to Breaching the Boardroom so you don't miss out on future conversations with industry leaders like Seth and Carolyn. If there's a topic you want us to cover, let us know, and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you all so much. We will see you next time. Thanks for joining us on Breaching the Boardroom. Join me in my pursuit of growth anywhere you listen to your podcast. For technology tips and tricks and leadership hacks, find me on LinkedIn. And don't forget to send me a DM or leave a comment on a topic you want me to cover next. This podcast is powered by NetGain Technologies, a top 250 internationally ranked managed security services provider headquartered in Lexington, Kentucky, with offices across the Southeast and Midwest.